Today in studio we have Rosa, who's going to be operating the camera. Is that right, Rosa? Are you operating the camera today, Rosa? Good girl.
This video is sponsored by TTArtisan. I'm just kidding, no it's not. But the people at Cameraworld were nice enough to send me a lens so we could do a couple of tests today. Everything I'm going to be sharing today is just my subjective opinion and you can decide what you like. So today we're going to be checking out the TTArtisan 35mm f1.4 manual focus lens, as well as the 50mm f0.95. Yes, 0.95, which is insane. So yeah, let's jump into it. So regarding photography, everybody else seems to be taking photos of plants outside. I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to be taking photos of plants inside. So starting with the TTArtisan 50mm f0.95, wide open, there's a lot of fringing, which is probably the first thing that I notice is the chromatic aberration which is happening with this lens when it's wide open. With the TTArtisan 35mm f1.4 all the way open, you got a lot more of a crispier image. There's a little bit of fringing happening there, but it's at the point where it's acceptable, and luckily it doesn't get any worse than that. Here's an example of the lenses at f4, and here's a comparison with my Fujifilm just to compare them. But other than that, I went outside and decided to test it on some plants outside as well with natural sunlight, and noticed that with the 35mm 1.4 you get subtle fringing but nothing too serious, but with the f0.95 50mm there's a lot of fringing. It's insane. And in some shots, like with this plant, it sort of looks dreamy and it kind of looks cool with the fringing, and you'll get some halation around the edges. That's that like blurry fuzzy edging thing happening there. So if that's a look they're going for, they're pulling it off. I can see how you'd want to get some shots like that, but at the same time, overall you wouldn't always be wanting to shoot wide open with this lens. So here's a couple of examples with some portraits I took of my sister. Thanks for the help, Annika. And you can see the difference. The lens flares are quite prominent in both of these lenses. I like the way these flares look. A lot of people complain about the flaring and say it's extreme and they don't like it. I personally like the flares, especially with the 35mm lens. I find them interesting and cool looking. Compared to the 50mm f0.95, there's just too much fuzz all over the image. But shooting handout with the TTArtisan 35mm f1.4, I found to be much easier to rack focus. It was much smoother. I had a bit more control. It was still a bit shaky. I still missed a few focus spots here and there. Not that I would recommend people should be shooting handout at that insane amount of depth without any kind of stabilization or tripod, but if you were to do it, it was much easier with the 35mm f1.4 than the 50mm f0.95. So back inside in the studio, looking at some pictures and little clips and testing the depth of these lenses, I went to go fetch a couple of teddy bears, these cute little toy teddy bears.
A little house here. Why not?
I'm happy on my own.
And I packed them out nicely and built a little teddy village so that I can test the depth and the light that comes in and all the different thingies happening there. Right off the bat with the 50mm f0.95, I noticed that
I've got a rack focus here, which is already a bit hard. You can see we're getting some of that halation around the edges, which is kind of cool in a way.
Like I said, stylistically, you can find interesting ways to incorporate this. It can look cool and dreamy in some effects.
This is with my indie filter on, and the indie filter seems to sort of kill that chromatic aberration that we were seeing earlier on.
Obviously, you can imagine with 0.95 aperture that you've got a very, very shallow depth of field.
Now I'm just slowly gonna rack focus to give you an example of how crazy this depth is. These ornaments are like a few centimeters away from each other. Minimum focus distance of like half a meter, which is a bit much.
So at the end of the day, the 0.95 is obviously going to have more depth, but I find the depth from the 1.4 to be just as good in comparison.
The minimum focus distance is like about 20 centimeters or so I can get nice and close, unlike the other one where I'm going to be half a meter away.
But I have to say the 35mm f1.4 still had an insane amount of depth.
They were between the I love you and their faces. So you can see you can still get quite a lot of depth.
At the end, I sort of just found that the 50mm f0.95 gives you a much softer, dreamy, creamy look. So if you're going for that dreamy, creamy look, you want to go with the f0.95. But if you want to go with a bit more of a salty, sharp look that also has some interesting characteristics, then go for the 35mm f1.4 lens.
Maximum hydration. Nivea for men.
But let's get real for a second. The only reason anybody would want to buy a lens like this with such a wide aperture is to shoot in extremely low light conditions. I mean, I can't think of any other reason to do that. So I figured let's do a little test and shoot a candlelit scene, because if Stanley Kubrick can shoot an entire feature film on f0.7 and just light the whole thing with candle lights, then surely we should be able to get a usable image shooting at f0.95. Right?
So welcome to my lounge, and this is where I'm going to be shooting this scene. Basically, the shot that I'm going to try and set up is having somebody come sit down here with a candle and see if that is going to be good enough to actually get a little bit of exposure. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start setting up. So I'm going to put some blue coming through this curtain here just to make it feel more like night. Then I'm going to light a candle and I'm going to do the scene, and we're going to see if it works on 0.95. After that, I'm going to swap it out for the 35mm 1.4 and see how close we can get those results to each other.
So after setting everything up, getting my frame and shooting multiple angles, the biggest thing that I realized was that focus was an issue with both of these lenses.
So I don't know if you can see anything. I definitely can't. But basically, it's almost impossible to focus. So that's where the Focus Buddy 9000 comes in. I don't know if you remember him from my no budget cinema videos, but that's where the Focus Buddy 9000 comes in to sort of just mark my position off so that I can lock my focus in and try again.
But after eventually landing the focus and getting it sorted, this is the 50mm f0.95 with no lights at the base ISO of 640 on my camera at f0.95.
Where's that book of mine? Ah, yes. The techniques of film and video editing. Ah, don't you just love reading in the dark about filmmaking and stuff? Radio. Whether film or radio was more popular mediums in the 1930s, it related to the question of blah, 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 blah. Editors who became directors. Why, Steve? Aha. I'm so glad I can read in the dark. I mean, if not for this TTArtisan f0.95 lens, I wouldn't be able to see anything, would I? Good night.
So out of curiosity, I wanted to see what the f1.4 compared to the 0.95. So I didn't adjust anything. The candle stayed the same, if not died a little bit. I left all my camera settings the same. I just changed the lenses, and this is what the 35mm f1.4 looked like.
Where's that book of mine? Ah, yes. How to film in the dark. That's what stands here, definitely. Don't read the title. If you would like to read in the dark, you need to be able to see in the dark. Duh. Anyways, how do I see in the dark? Editors who became directors. Stephen Jacobs from Why Steve. Aha, definitely one of the greatest cinematographers to ever live. Ah, lenses to see in the dark. The TTArtisan f1.4 35mm manual focus lens. It has great low light performance, and they've practically got it for every single camera mount there is. Wow! I should be sure to get myself one of those TTArtisan f1.4 35mm Fuji X mount lenses.
So I have to say, I was quite impressed by the performance of the 35mm f1.4 and how well it compared to the 0.95. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the two with the similar shots from similar framings, the one at 0.95 and the other one at f1.4, and you can see the f1.4 lets in almost the same amount of light as the 0.95. So I was really impressed by the low light performance of the 35mm f1.4. This entire video was shot with the 50mm f0.95 lens. That's what you're looking at right now. So if you want to get that dreamy, funky look and get that tiny bit of extra light squeezed in, and you're willing to pay the extra buck, go for the 0.95. But if you want to get a lens that is quite similar to the 0.95, lets in a lot of light, has some crazy depth as well, and is much easier to focus and work with, then go for the 35mm f1.4. Because like I said, for half the price, you can get something that performs almost just as well. So if you want to grab yourself one of these TTArtisan lenses, be sure to visit Cameraworld or Camera Warehouse South Africa for some affordable prices and some pretty sweet camera gear. And I just want to thank you guys again for sending me this lens so that I can test it out and do this review. Now you know what it's like, so I hope that helps you make a decision. And in the end, let me know in the comments which one you like the most. You decide. Is this lens for you or not? It looks like my background is falling apart. I think that is probably my cue to start finishing up here.
Bad background. Bad background.